Hello and welcome back to the Freedom Podcast. I'm here with Dave. Dave, how are you doing?
Come on, mate. Yeah, I'm good. I'm happy to be alive. Josh had a near-death experience last night.
Oh
It was,
my gosh.
yeah, it was pretty intense.
Tell me more. Tell us more.
I was out for a run. I'm training for a long race at the end of the year, so my running is like starting to get long. So I'm out for about 2 hours, about an hour and a half in. I'm closing in on the final bit, and the heavens opened, and it was absolutely epic. You know, it was kind of like over here in the US, we get those kind of walls of rain. It was like that, but then the thunder and lightning start, and I'm about 25 minutes from home, and big sheet lightning, and then big forks of lightning, and it was amazing. And I'm there, rain. I'm shouting like, "Woo! This is awesome!" Counting the lightning, and it's like 8 miles away, 9 miles away. Oh, I'm all right. I'm okay. This is fine. And then I go around the corner, and then it feels like it's getting a little bit closer, and I count this about 4 or 5 miles away. And then out of nowhere, Josh, out of nowhere, this bolt of lightning hits the ground about 50 yards from me. I've never seen lightning and thunder simultaneously. It was like bam, and it literally shook the ground. I like cowered like this, and I still had probably about 10 minutes left to run. And this particular run was designed to go very slow, just kind of build up your aerobic base. I have never sprinted so fast in my life. And with every bit of lightning, I was like this, like this. But yeah, I wasn't just being
You are a
wimp.
madman.
Well, I got home and Saz was like, "What the heck are you all right?" She was like, "I was actually getting worried about you. She'd been calling me, but I didn't take my phone with me." So
No more night runs for you, mate. You've got to do morning only. It's storm season.
Mate, I'm going back out tonight. Yeah,
No,
it's gonna be awesome.
you've got to do the mornings. It's too dangerous. That's horrible to hear.
It was pretty wild.
The 50 yard. Did you see it? Did you see the actual bolt? Like, what did it hit? Did it hit
It hit in the forest. So I'm running next to the forest, and it went right into the middle of the forest. And it was so weird, man, because as I turned the corner, I just, you know how your imagination runs. And I was like, oh, what if there was this big bolt of lightning and it lit the forest, and it then exactly happened. So I was joking, and I was praying like, God, this is amazing, because I've been talking about, the power of God on Sunday, and about how we underestimate just how powerful he is. And as I'm, the first 10 minutes of my run, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. God, you're so powerful. And then I was like, please don't kill me, Lord.
Yeah, we were here in a meeting last night, and we had some thunder and lightning here as well. And it was a massive crack. It was so loud. And we've had some lately where like you can feel the house shake. Like the storms here are another level.
It is amazing though, Josh, isn't it? We had that last year. There was a storm straight overhead. It's about 2:00 in the morning, and it literally shook the house and woke us up. It was just wild.
Unbelievable. And when this went off last night, this kind of huge crack, I said to the guys that it just reminds you like how small we are and how big God is. It's like just a little reminder there. It's like your world and that is power.
It is, mate. And I think you're a massive fan of this. Obviously, getting out into nature, it's so important, because I'm not suggesting go out in a lightning storm like I did. In fact, nobody go and do that, because it was actually very dangerous. But it is incredible. And it reminds me, there's a verse in Revelation which says that in heaven, all of our prayers, they fill a censer, like a big cup. And then there are angels that, as the censer overflows, hurl the prayers back to earth in ripples of lightning and thunder. And I know we've been talking about prayer in a number of our locations recently with the Mountain Movers series and different things like that. And it was just such a reminder. It was like, actually, our prayers can touch earth. Our prayers can make a difference to what's happening around us. The highs, the lows, the things that scare us, the things that confuse us. It is such a reminder that actually, as our prayers go up, heaven comes down. And it is pretty wild. It is pretty cool, though.
Come on. Well, Dave, I actually wanted us to talk today a little bit about power, political power. Woo! And this is a little bit of a dicey subject for us, because I think that we don't really talk about issues like this very often. but I was just thinking about how we've just had the UK elections. So we've had a change of government in the UK for the first time in 14 years.
Massive shift.
And
Yeah.
then we've got also had, I was seeing that we've got another election happening in Rwanda, where the president's going, I think, for another term over there. And then obviously we're in a election year here in America as well. And
Yep.
obviously we had quite a huge thing going on this last weekend here in the US. And it was obviously the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. And it was really shocking, wasn't it?
Yeah.
How did you find out about it on Saturday night?
I regularly check the news like a couple of times a day, and I can't remember what it'd been, but I just opened up my phone, and it was there, and I saw this picture of Donald Trump in a bleeding ear, and I was like, "What?" And then I text you, "Have you seen the news?" It was kind of one of those moments that I'll remember for a long time, because obviously, I don't, in my lifetime, in a nation that I've been living in, I haven't experienced an attempted assassination. In fact, I think it's the first assassination attempt in the US in 43 years, so yeah, I saw it on my phone, and then I was kind of glued, to my phone, and sort of some of the news sites that I follow online, just trying to like understand what's just happened, what's been going on. So yeah, really quite obviously, yeah, a whole range of emotions, and certainly for us here, for our people in our churches, for many, outside of political persuasions or even political engagement, an event like that is major. When you've got kind of one of the national leaders, a former president in a situation that it's massive. And even in church on Sunday, I was talking about prayer, and I just said, the phrase, I mean, is everyone not aware that our world and our nation needs prayer right now? And the whole room, just responded, and kind of just was very engaged, because I think whether you're there or not, whatever your personal opinions are, when something like that happens, it makes you realize, oh my goodness, where is our world at? Like we need to pray, we need to pray. We need to do that. So yeah, how about you, mate? Where were you?
Yeah, I was just here at home that evening, and yeah, it was shocking news. I saw the clip, as a lot of people have seen across the world, and the photos. Actually, that was the first thing I saw. I saw a photo. Someone posted it on social media, and I saw the photo of Donald Trump, like, kind of raising the fist. And I was like, what on earth is going on here?
Yeah.
And then obviously, I didn't know at first if it was one of those AI images, It's like one of those things of like, it's just a made up image. It's like, oh no, this is real time. This is happening. And yeah, shocking stuff. And one of the things that, that for us, obviously, as Christ followers, I think it's a conversation to have today, just to talk about what it means to be a Christian, where we're in a political world, and there's different parties, there's sides of power, there's voting, and how do we handle that? How do we operate within that world? And obviously, just it's the awfulness and evil of humanity to try and destroy another side, a differing opinion that is from your own. I mean, that is just truly terrible, and we, obviously as believers, totally are against that kind of rhetoric, that kind of hatred, that kind of evil. But how do we as Christians operate within this political world? And I think that this is obviously a very extreme example, but even putting that aside for a moment and just thinking about how we see ourselves. I know for a lot of people that they would see themselves as it's part of their identity being connected to a political party. And I personally believe that we have to be Christ followers first, and that is our central affiliation, because a lot of people would say that they're Christian and then therefore attach themselves to a political party. But I actually think that it's far more complex than that, and that we have to uh, be first and foremost followers of Christ, and then we might choose to vote or and get involved in something, but actually we're not going to count ourselves as, well, that's who I am, that's a part of my identity, because that almost can be very you're kind of pinning your colors to the mast, and you don't actually know the fullness of the people that lead that. Do you know them? Do you know how they live their life every day? And I think that there's something very important about those that count themselves as Christians, as those who are Christ followers. And I keep using that term because I think often people can call themselves Christians, but when was the last time you were following the voice of Jesus? It's almost part of Christianity can be our heritage rather than we're following Jesus every day. But those that are following Jesus, that we're first and foremost identified by that rather than a political affiliation.
Yeah, I completely agree. And of course, there are things about our following of Christ, to use that phrase like you're saying, Josh, that can express themselves in in what we value and what we stand for, etc. But I think, we live in such a world right now where the polarization and the dehumanization of the conversation is just extreme. And it's not that hasn't happened in history before. I was actually listening to a podcast yesterday, and one person on the podcast said, "Oh, everybody's so polarized. And it's like, yeah, but this has been the history of some nations around the world,
Right.
And I think, and even if we rewind to Jesus' time, it was a highly charged political time.
Definitely.
Highly charged. The Pharisees, the religious leaders, the Roman oppression, even the Jewish expectation of what the Messiah would look like was hugely fused to a political, national identity, a sense of change, a sense of liberation in those things. And yet what Jesus does is he comes and brings a different kingdom liberation. He comes and brings a different kingdom idea. And so I think for us as Christians, the point you're making that is so important is how do we be as we follow Christ? How do we be about his kingdom first, not an earthly version of that? And sometimes that's hard to understand depending on kind of your background and different things like that. But the polarization side of it, I think, Josh, it really does, it dehumanizes, and more and more people are unable to see the person on the other side. We're starting to only see the policies or the personalities. And I'm not saying that policy isn't important. I think voting is massively important, and there have been policy things that have changed my traditional vote of one thing to another thing. I think they matter. But I think what Christ taught us is that people matter first.
Right.
You love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor. This is maybe controversial to say, but I'm going to go there. Your neighbor over your nation, your person, the person next door that might disagree with you, the person next door that might even be wrong and might even want for something that isn't of God's kingdom. You don't agree with that. You don't have to be about their policies, but it's about the person. And I think that we as Christians have an opportunity to be an example of how we disagree well and yet still value an individual. How we can have, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I love that example, Dave, because I think that the Samaritan example is a great one where the Israelites and the Samaritans saw things very differently. They had different viewpoints, they had different belief systems, and yet Jesus used that as the greatest example of how we should love one another. That even when you are differing so much to someone on another side of views and opinions and where you've come from, that you would still love one another. And that is the most important factor of being a Christ follower. And obviously, sadly, a lot of political opinion can turn into this vitriol, this hate. And when it starts to veer into that, and I think as well, one of the things that is so important is that where are we placing our hope?
Yeah, that's
So
good, Josh.
if we place our hope into political leaders or parties, I can tell you they will always fail in some way. They always let you down because they're a human governance. And actually, the only ones that we can truly put our hope in and our faith in is our Lord and Savior,
Yeah.
Jesus. And so when we almost get absorbed into this is going to be the answer, this is going to change everything, for our nation of Rwanda or our nation in the UK, and actually we start to lose sight that actually it's God who brings the change, and humans are always going to have limitations really on the change and power that they're going to be able to bring to a nation. So I think we've got to really, we can of course vote, have political opinion, but there is, I think we've got to be careful about guarding our heart, about not really placing our hope in those things.
Yeah, and I think particularly where those things separate us from another human being and actually put us in a position where our gospel witness is inhibited because of the greatest mission for every one of us as Christians is the gospel of salvation. That's our greatest mission. And I'm not saying I have, throughout most of my adult life been quite engaged in politics, been quite passionate. I leaned out for the last maybe 5 or 10 years because I wasn't able to steward that conversation as well as I could, as well as I needed to. I'm not saying it's not important. I think there are gravely important things for us to consider on policies and when I say policies, it's who, what, and how, not just the banner label. It's what does that really mean, and they are very, very valuable. But when we place our hope in those things in such a way that it separates us from another human being, the actual adverse effect is how do we preach the gospel? How can we preach the gospel to those people if we're separated from? And I think we just have to acknowledge that. Like you're saying, that the vitriol, the polarization, there is, without getting, too funny about it, like there is a media machine that is about making money that ultimately, I'm not getting conspiracy theory-esque or anything like that. It's just a fact. It's a human fact. You go back, study the 1900s and the beginning of advertising, propaganda, it's money that goal is, and sensationalism breeds interest. And so I think one of the biggest things that we can do to have wisdom as a Christian is to watch our echo chamber and to watch the algorithm that is feeding us, to watch the echo chamber we're in, and place ourselves in an echo chamber with Christ. What's he saying? What, if you're spending 8 hours, maybe that's a bit extreme, engaging with news feeds, Insta things, TikTok, X posts, all these different things, and we're spending 5 minutes with Jesus with a bit of a Bible reading as we get out of bed. Make Jesus your echo chamber, because Jesus was killed, right? He was killed for some of the things he called people to do that had a political implication, right? He was a threat as an uprising. There was all this kind of stuff. But what does he say? Like you just said, the Samaritan, when he goes and I could be wrong here, but if not maybe the first person that Jesus revealed himself to by verbal acknowledgement that he was the Messiah was the Samaritan woman at the well, right? The enemy. And even Jesus talks about the Samaritans like they are wrong and that their policies aren't right and that the way they live isn't good, that they are, he doesn't ignore those things. He says that's going to change. But Jesus reveals himself to the very person that actually the system was going to push you away from. And so I just think we've got to, in this time, hold our beliefs strong. Yes, fine. But get in an echo chamber with Jesus before you're going to post something. run your. Anyway, I'm
I
running.
think
I'm
that's a
running
great
off a bit here.
example, Dave. It's like, what are you feeding from? Because I think that when we are feeding from some of that content, how do we feel after? We maybe feel angry. We maybe feel entitled. Perhaps we feel fearful or worried about the future. And then when you spend time with Jesus and you spend time in his word and you spend time in prayer, you feel peace, you feel confidence, you feel faith. And so I think it's a great measure sometimes, like, what have I consumed more of? What am I drinking from? And we do have to be careful about how much we consume of opinion. And yeah, especially with things like now where, there's so many opinions, and sometimes some of those things are not true. And so we've got to be really careful. It's like, what can we really trust? Is the word of God. We've got to keep
Yeah,
coming back to that. And I really don't think that we should be monks and shut ourselves off from the world
yeah,
and not be aware of what's going on. I think that there is some wisdom around staying in touch with what's going on. But I also felt as a leader in the past, like my own personal disposition in this, is that I would never make a public political statement in terms of like, hey, I back this party, or um, and I think that is wrong. That we should not muddy those waters as people of God, where it's that we are saying something about a political side that we're advocating for and encouraging people to lean into. I made one statement, I think, about 5-6 years ago, where I put one Facebook statement where I was like, I think that this person should be the next political leader of a party. And so it wasn't there wasn't election happening, but they were voting for the leader of that political party, and I advocated for that person, and I regretted that. I don't think I was actually pastoring at that point, because we'd handed over the church in Hereford, but I was still on the leadership team of Freedom Church. And I thought about it after, and I thought, I wish I hadn't said that. Even though it wasn't going to election, it was still an angling of a political opinion, and I felt a conviction around that. Actually, that's not my place, and I've got to be careful almost of the position that I have, that I don't leverage that. Not that it's going to have a massive impact on anyone, but that there's still, actually, that's between, if I've got those opinions and those are my personal convictions, that's fine, and I can share those one-on-one, but I wouldn't share something like that again on a public platform.
yeah, and I think that's definitely particularly relevant for us as leaders. But we're all influencers in some way, shape, or form, aren't we? And I think probably the greatest thing, if you're a part of Freedom Church, Courageous Church in any location, the greatest thing outside of the gospel and loving God that we're called to promote is unity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think does the way I carry myself promote unity? Even unity in the kingdom, unity in the church, even through disagreement. I think I do think we have churches all over the world, and you and I have never experienced. I don't think you've experienced. I know I haven't experienced a political oppression that is literally like threat to life.
Right.
And a dictatorship. You and I have both lived in democratic nations where our disagreement and our perhaps our differences on policy maybe could be nuanced at the very least, and significant at the most. I think there is an interesting conversation for some of our churches where perhaps it's threat to life, and there is different things like that. I'm not going to get into that now, because I don't have the experience, the authority to that. As in where perhaps there would be a time that I would say that's not right or that's not wrong. But I think that make a stand. And I just want to mention that because I know that there may well be some people listening to this in our church that's literally what you've experienced. We have refugees in our church that are living in nations that are not their national home because of those situations. And and obviously I don't know what that would ever, haven't had to experience that myself, but for the vast majority of us, I think what you're saying is exactly right. And I think the other thing is, what, again, every time I post anything, the question really that matters is, what's my motivation in the first place? Why am I posting that thing? What is it?
I think one of the things that we can look at as well is Jesus and his example to us with the political environment that he was in. And I think about how he is in an oppressive situation with the Romans. And obviously, it's a huge narrative that the disciples, there's some of the disciples that think about this, there's some of his followers, there are those in Israel looking for a breaking away from the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
We need to overthrow this oppressive power. And then we look at how much Jesus says against the Romans, and it's like, you're going to have to look for a long time, because there's really not anything that Jesus says. And so Jesus was so much more about his kingdom. And almost there was this obsession with the Romans and, right, we've got to overthrow this empire. And that was not what Jesus had come to do.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the Roman Empire was going to crumble and fail in the centuries to come. And here's the church, what the kingdom, thousands of years later, bigger than ever, growing more than ever, that actually the Roman Empire was, in the grand scheme of things, going to be so insignificant compared to the kingdom that Jesus was building. And I think that that's a great vantage and picture sometimes.
That's great.
Of how, whatever it feels so big or grand, when you compare it to the work that God wants to do, it's actually, whatever that situation is minor when you compare it to maybe the centuries, the big thing that God is doing. And I think of, that moment where Jesus is given the coin, and that talks about, where do you pay taxes? Should we pay them should we pay our taxes to Caesar? And obviously they're trying to catch him because the Jews don't want to pay their taxes. And Jesus comes up with this incredible response. Give me the coin. And he takes the coin. Whose face is on it? Caesar's. Well, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. And that it's one of the best lines in history. It's just so clever. And so where he has this opportunity, if you like, to almost come out and make a political statement, Jesus says, you still give what is owed. And obviously they were being oppressed and taken advantage of. They're obviously in the streets as an occupying force, and they're using the Israelites to pay for that governance. And we're paying to be governed by someone else.
It's crazy.
But Jesus says, you pay that, but give to God the heart, give to God what is God's. It's like, that's the way that Jesus dealt with it.
Yeah. And like you said, when, the revolution of the church in that day was that when there were people truly giving everything of their heart over to Christ, nothing could stop it. And it literally ends up consuming the very empire that took it, was trying to oppress it. And that is such a huge picture for us. Because I think one of the things I think is that the fear that strikes us is, can I trust that it's going to be okay? Can I trust that God's going to come through? And I think that's really part of it, is like, actually give to God your heart, trust him in these moments, in this time. There's it's fascinating, but there's this scripture that I was thinking about when you mentioned we were going to talk about this, and it's super well known. But it's 1 Timothy 2, 1-2. You'll know it. It says, I therefore encourage everybody. I urge you, in fact, Paul says, urge you, first of all, before posting, before this, first of all, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men. Give thanks for all men, all people, even the opposing side. Like, isn't that kind of crazy, right? For kings and for all in authority. And then this was the bit that I think wanted to kind of draw. So firstly, obviously prayer, but then this, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. And I'm not suggesting, in freedom, courageous, we are like, we're lions, let's go, we're giant killers. Ah! We don't have too many, series about live a quiet and peaceable life. But I actually think that relates massively to the internal posture of our heart. Prayer changes who we are inside. And is my heart quiet and peaceable in the way that I view that person, in the way that I feel about that person? Is my heart, in that right place? Because that's what Jesus, I love what you said there. Give to Caesar what Caesar's, cast your vote, do your research, think it through, but give to God what's, don't give it your heart. And I think that when you pray for all people, even those you don't like, even though it does something in your heart, it transforms your heart. Give thanks for all things. It shifts your heart. And I think that's really my dominant thought in this whole thing is, do I think politics is important? Yes. Do I think policy is important? Yes. Do I think people should do their research? Absolutely. And you should vote with confidence and clarity of what you're trying to achieve. But you need to give your heart to Jesus first and let him lead that.
Totally agree. Yeah, and I know, obviously, Dave, I know you well, and I know that your family that you came from, it was a big part of like your identity as your family. Oh, we are this political affiliation. And I know that was a huge thing for you, really, to almost become less almost by your disposition, by your upbringing, to say, actually, I'm God's first.
Yeah, hugely.
And do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very personal part of my story. I haven't really talked much. That's why you know about it as one of my best friends. But yeah, growing up Welsh, and passionately so, really meant that you were automatically affiliated to a certain UK party. And going back to the 80s and 90s, that the differentiation between the impact that would have on you as a, I come from a working class background. My parents in the middle class. I grew up, more comfortable in that sort of sense, but it was much more stark. So, yeah, I mean, growing up, I would have said things like, I would never vote, regardless of the person, the policy. I would never vote for anybody but this group. And even to the extreme, I've said this before, but obviously we have a king in the UK. But as a young man growing up, obviously, it was a queen, obviously the queen at the time, but she ain't my queen. She's an English queen. She ain't the Welsh queen. I was very, very, very strongly opinionated. And, even my passion at rugby games would come out and it would boil over. It would boil over in negative. It was a moment at my first year of university. Oh, this is a good, bad and good story. It was the Rugby World Cup 2003. 2003, first year of college. England are playing Wales in the quarterfinal. Wales have played terribly up until this point. This is the World Cup that England go on to win. And
I remember.
Yeah, and Wales nearly beat England in the quarterfinal. So obviously I'm a passionate rugby fan. But actually deep under it is this political, national undertone. And there was a moment in the game where Johnny Wilkinson tries this crossfield kick, fails, and then we do it. I leap from a sitting position to the top of the table, and I'll just be honest, I yell a bunch of expletives at the English like this, right? And here was the shame of it all. I'm about 9-10 months into being in my first year at university, and I've been passionate about Jesus the whole time. I've invited people to evangelistic events, and then I am swearing on the top of a table in front of hundreds of people in a bar, right? I didn't watch a rugby game in public for 2 years after that, because I was like, I can't compromise my witness for Christ for my this. But here's where it's powerful. What God spoke to me personally about around my political affiliations, my national stuff, is that really it was an idol. And that's the point. It was an idol. It was something that I worshipped. It was something that I loved. And am I saying it's wrong to be passionate about your Nate? No, but it was an idol that overtook God. The first commandment, have no other gods but me. and really it was a God. It was a God. And that won't be relevant for everybody, but for some of us listening, maybe that's it. And I think it was a really liberating, freeing experience where, of course, I love being Welsh. Of course, I love being where I'm from. I love my family, all those kind of things. I'm going to spend eternity as a citizen of heaven, not as a citizen of Wales. And yes, I know Revelation 7 verse 9, every tribe, every nation, every tongue, there is something of how God's made us that will still be represented in heaven, and that's beautiful and that's amazing. But citizen of heaven. And it was very liberating, very freeing. I don't think I would have ever, in fact, I know I would have never been able to have stayed in Freedom Hereford had God not done that work in me, which would have meant I would have never got set free, which would have meant we would have never planted a church in Cardiff, which meant we would have never gone on the leadership team, which meant we would have never come here in Charleston. And I know that might sound like a big claim, but actually getting free in that area 17 years later is connected to why me, Saz, and the kids are planting a church, seeing people come to know Christ in Charleston, South Carolina, of all places. So, yeah, it's just a little bit of my own personal journey with that.
Come on, Dave. Thanks for sharing that. It is amazing to see. And I think that just to recognize as well that some people have specific calling into political careers or political parties. And God says, right, I want to use you as a mouthpiece here in this place. And I think that, we recognize that there's something very different. And I think a lot of this conversation has been specifically for those of us that are not called to that, which is the majority of us. But I love that thought, and I think it's a great one to finish on about, you've got to give the heart to God. That's the most important thing. Keep our hearts for God. Keep Him first. So, Dave, thanks for wading into some of that with me, and we hope that this has been a helpful conversation. Maybe just think about some things. Be careful about how we speak. I always think that we need to remember that we're called to be slow to speak. I think a lot of sometimes get ourselves in trouble when we're reactive. Sometimes we just need to think, reflect, pray before we start expressing. But know that God is our hope, that He must have our hearts, that He's truly the answer for this world. So we love you guys, and we will be back soon with another episode. Thanks, everyone.